Hello, everybody. My name is Mondre Moffett, and I am the host of Black Music Footprints, the Jazz Experience. I'm very excited about today's show. I have music trailblazer, the man with the magic touch, pioneer guitarist, Mr. Stanley Jordan. Welcome, Stanley Jordan, to Black Music Footprints, a Jazz Experience.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here today.
Yeah, I came up with this name, Black Music Footprints, because as musicians, what we're always trying to do is celebrate the rich tradition of African American music, as well as following in the footsteps of those musical giants that lay down the pathway for us to follow. It's a way to measure just how good we're doing when we go back and listen to, in your case, maybe Charlie Christian and some of these great guitarists. But you are such a trailblazer that really paved your own way. And you're one of those musical giants that is really laying down the footwork from your just new discoveries about how to play the guitar. You play two guitars at the same time. I've seen you be very prolific with playing guitar and piano. And then you do many shows, solo shows. And so I want to talk about your journey. We go way back. I was telling the story before we came on. It seems as though every time I'm around you, you invite me. I'm so humble because you usually invite me to play with you.
Oh, it's my honor.
So I said, so I was just hanging out with my brother, and you said, "Hey, you got your trumpet?" I said, "Yeah." And I got a chance to play with you in Charlotte on a number of pieces and everything. It wasn't like I was really sitting in it. There wasn't a jam session, but it was an honor. Then I played with you when I was teaching at North Carolina A&T State University. I don't know if you remember that.
Yes.
In fact, I brought you there. That's right. I brought you to North Carolina A&T to perform as an artist, and you invited me up. And my chancellor was at the performance. And, all my points and credits really went up high when he saw me playing with Stanley Jordan,
Well,
But,
not only did we play together, but also I had a chance to talk about why you were such an important artist to me and your family and your legacy. I mentioned all that from the stage, so I know that that they really appreciated it, and maybe there was even some things that they didn't know about
yeah,
you.
well, it certainly confirmed what they had read about and what I had been saying all the time. I had a very successful jazz ensemble there, and my reputation was intact. But having you come and talk about the Moffett family as being one of the premier families in jazz history, really. I just had a conversation with Branford, who, the Marcellus family. Well, back in the day, it was the Marcellus family and the Moffett family.
Hmm.
We did opposite things together in terms of recording. And speaking of which, I think you and I have recorded together on my brother's Charnet's record, as well as my brother's Cody's records.
Hmm.
So we have a long family kinship from your days even in California. I learned that you were in Stanford, living in California at the time that the Moffett family was in Oakland. And you knew of us at that time, but we didn't know of you. Is that right?
Right, because I used to see you guys perform on more than one occasion. On at least a few times I went to see you. For example, at the Nairobi Jazz Festival in East Palo Alto.
That's right.
And I believe that was around 1970. And that was before I even started playing guitar. I was just a pianist, and I was composing in a sort of a late romantic style. I liked rock, but I wasn't really playing jazz yet. And I wanted to find a way in, and I would go and I'd listen to you guys and just try to figure out what are they doing. And one of the things that I loved so much about what you were doing was it was not just the virtuosity, but also the level of creativity. And that really left a footprint on me because this whole idea that music is a creative endeavor, and that you can push that creativity to the limit and beyond. And that was a stamp. And I'm really fortunate that I was exposed to that approach at such a young age, because that was an imprint for me. I think I also saw you guys. Let's see, there's some other occasions that I don't remember for sure, but I remember Charnett when he was 8.
Yeah.
Um,
8 years old, a monster
yeah,
on
yeah,
bass. Yeah.
yeah. He had that fire already, and so anyway, yeah. Um, that was really inspirational to me. And back in those days, I thought, I wonder if I could learn this and get good enough to play with people like this someday.
And then you ended up leaving California. The Moffitt family relocated in New York. You went to Princeton. I'm really fast forward the narratives of your journey. Of course, you're born in Chicago, right?
Hmm.
Ended up in California. And is that Silicon Valley where you were located?
Yeah, we moved out there before they called it Silicon Valley.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, we were just talking with some family friends. There's a important engineer, Roy Clay, who designed the first computer that Hewlett Packard ever sold and launched that whole revolution where small companies could have their own computer. And a lot of people regard that as the beginning of the Silicon Valley revolution. Certainly there were things going on in the tech industry before that, but that's when it really started to catch on beyond that region. And the reason I bring this up is because my father, David Jordan, was the personnel manager at Hewlett Packard, and he's the one who hired Roy Clay to that job.
I didn't know
that. So we have a family legacy from the tech industry, and what I've tried to do is sort of take my interest in science and the sort of humane and creative uses of technology, and applying that to the arts to do things that maybe could expand what's available, the tools available to us musicians.
Yeah, and you started this. You majored in some type of computer science at Princeton.
Well, I majored in music, but I also studied related computer topics, particularly computer music. And this was something that was new at the time. This was before MIDI. They had a system there that didn't have a keyboard. Everything was done by programming. So by today's standards, it was definitely not easy to use. However, the thing that was so awesome about it for me is, as a budding composer, it was so exciting because for the first time in human history, we had an instrument that could make any possible sound. It was just mind-blowing.
Yeah. And you ended up signing with Blue Note when it was trying to revive itself. Now, parallel to your career, we had my kid brother Charnett beginning to work with Branford and Wynton. I think he was 13 or 14 years old, okay? Won his first Grammy with Wynton Marsalis, Black Codes. And Charnett said, man, I'm really trying to work with this musical genius. His name is Stanley Jordan, He was transitioning, because he was, Charnett has always been the pioneer himself, from Wynton and Branford to working with Few. And so Wynton is signed with Columbia, and then you signed with Blue Note, and this record came out.
I have a funny story about that too. Okay, so in between all of that, I had been living in Wisconsin, in Madison, Wisconsin, and Wynton came to play. Charnett wasn't in the band. I think maybe Charles Fambro was on bass at the time.
Phil Boulder.
Anyway, they came and played in Madison, and I got to meet Wynton at that show, and I did a little playing for him. So we met then, and he knew what I was doing.
Oh.
And so years later, when I was ready to start my stuff in New York, I used that number. I called Wynton's number, and Charnett answered the phone.
You're kidding.
Yeah, because he was staying at Wynton's.
That's right. Charnett was actually living with Wynton and Branford by that time.
Right, but he was out of town at the time, and Charnett answered the phone, and then he figured out that who I was, and of course I knew who he was. So that's really the first time we talked.
Wow. Yeah, I almost forgotten about.
I'm going to do an album. I want you to be on my album.
I almost forgot that when Wynton Bradford would leave town before Chernett was in the band, because Wynton bought Chernett one of his first bass, the upright
Mm.
bass. He said, you need a better quality bass. Chernett would live in Wynton Bradford's place over in Brooklyn. They were in Brooklyn at the time, I think, in Clinton Hill. And that was. So you signed with Blue Note, and this record, Lady in My Life, stayed on the charts 52 weeks. Huge seller.
The album was called Magic Touch.
Right.
And the biggest hit on the album was The Lady in My Life. And the album was number one. It was 51 weeks. So it was the longest running number one record. Now, I have to say, I do think, it was a good record, of course, and all that.
Yeah.
But we also had just a magic of timing, because I had met Bruce Lundvall before he revived Blue Note. And he was at another label. This was back when I was living in Wisconsin. He was at another label, and he was interested in signing me, but I wasn't ready. And so when I finally came to New York and I said, okay, I went to his office, what do we do? What's the next step? He said, before we start, I have to tell you, I don't work here anymore. I just got a call last night from the chairman of Capitol Industries. They want to revive Blue Note. They want to start a major pop label on the East Coast, and I want you to be the first artist I sign. So I just happened to come that day that, that Bruce was making that transition. And it's so interesting, because before that, people have been saying, what are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? I was like, no, the time isn't right. It isn't right. And finally, it turned out it was good that I waited. And I was the first artist. And so we had not only the whole promotion staff for Blue Note, but also Manhattan EMI, the pop label, their promotion staff as well. They were both working the same record, and it was the first record they had. So they really wanted to make sure that the record did well. So I think it was a good kind of a perfect storm in a good way, because it goes to show that music can do well, even if it doesn't fit a conventional popular music formula. My album had a lot of variety on it. It wasn't your usual typical record. I mean, of course, it had jazz tunes. It had Charnette on it. We did some great jazz on it.
Yeah.
It also had a song by Jimi Hendrix. It had, The Lady in My Life, the Rod Temperton, Michael Jackson song. So that concept of an album that kind of bridges the gaps was unusual at the time, but it just goes to show, anything can be popular if the industry decides that they want to promote it. And that's a big lesson for me, because, people always tell you, you have to conform in order to have success. You have to conform musically. And I fought against that my whole career, and so I'm glad that I kind of stuck to my vision.
Yeah, you've been able to maintain a career doing solo concerts all over the world. I mean, that is well. First of all, you play so many instruments simultaneously that allows you to do that, I guess. My brother Charnette tried that for a while with bass and all of his things that he does with the bass, more than likely inspired by you. But have you?
Sorry about that too.
Yeah, and the mini trio concerts, and are you doing a lot of solo work?
Yeah, I'm still doing my solo shows. I also do trio shows. We have something coming up next April in New York, and it's going to be a combination of my trio for the first set, and then for the second set, I'm doing this new project called Stanley Plays Jimmy, and it's a tribute to Jimi Hendrix, and it's different from the sort of conventional Hendrix tribute, because I imagine that Jimmy is still with us today, and it's my fantasy of what Jimmy would be doing if he were still playing today. So I approach the show as an actor as well as a musician, and I really try to create in every possible way as best I can a Jimi Hendrix concert of today. It's a wonderful project. I just absolutely love this project. So we're doing my jazz trio and the Hendrix show in mid-April in New York.
All in the same night. I mean,
Yeah, two different shows.
Two different shows, but
first time we're combining it though in the same night, so people could come and actually come to both shows.
Wow, that's going to be phenomenal. That's in April?
Yeah, it's like around the 22nd or so.
Yeah, I'm gonna look out for that. That's a reason for me to fly back to New York, and probably in Times Square someplace, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah, that would be a great date. And so when you do your trio settings, the last time I saw you play, I didn't know you were so prolific on piano as you are. You play piano and guitar, but I don't know if did you have a career, or guitar was your main axe when you started your career? Did you ever really focus on piano before?
I did in the beginning because piano was my first instrument. And so like when I first saw you guys, I was a pianist.
Okay.
And then when I started getting into jazz, that was after I played guitar. So I started playing guitar when I was 11. And there was a time in my life when I didn't have access to a piano, and I started guitar, and I absolutely loved it. And I knew that guitar was my main instrument. But I still missed some of the possibilities of the piano, some of the textural possibilities. So I started experimenting with the guitar to bring some of that to the guitar. And that was the genesis of my whole touch technique on the guitar. And so that definitely was very useful for me to work out how to do that. But there were still some things that I missed about the piano. So I started going back and redeveloping the piano. I have to say, guitar is still really my instrument. And so I have a lot more training and a lot more knowledge on the guitar. But in another way, that's kind of good in a certain way, because with piano, I don't have so many patterns and things I can rely on. And so I have just sort of a natural affinity with the instrument. And so I rely on that more, and it's sort of more instinctive, whereas my guitar is sort of more polished and kind of more, edumacated, if I could use such a word. I get the both. I get both. And when I approach the two instruments, I don't think of them as two different instruments. I think of them as a single instrument with just a variety of colors that I can blend. Just like, for example, if someone were playing an organ and they have different keyboards, and they put different sounds on different keyboards and stuff, it's the same. That's how I think of it. It's
the same
one
concept with the pedals and everything that's there. I read where, and I didn't know this until this week, that you actually tune the guitar differently. You tune it in fourths.
Oh yeah.
From E up, all the way up. You don't go to the G and the B and the E, but you tune it in fourths all the way up. That's interesting. I'd never known anybody tune the guitar that way. That allows you to get to some things that you normally wouldn't get to. How did you come out to just actually, that's what I mean by musical pioneer, to actually create a new way, the tuning of the guitar to begin with?
So the fourth tuning is simpler than the conventional tuning, because all the intervals straight across are fourths. So because it's always the same interval, I can move patterns from one set of strings to another, and the form doesn't change. So it drastically reduces the number of shapes I have to learn in order to make the same sounds, basically. And it's not just a question of efficiency. Like yes, maybe for the same amount of practice time, I can digest more material. Yes, that's true. But there's also another benefit, and I think you can relate to this as a creative improviser. When you're on the spot and you're essentially improvisation is composition, right? It's just real-time composition. And so because it's in the moment, you don't have unlimited time to think up what you're going to play.
Right.
And so if you have a more efficient way of accessing your musical vocabulary, then there's a greater vocabulary that's available to you in that moment. And so it also helps me as an improviser in the moment.
Yeah, I was reflecting also on, I often say when I think about, we come from the lineage with Arnett Coleman and his freedom. He's way outside the lines, but yet he's so logical. And the thing about Arnett Coleman's music, he's one of the only artists that so prolific, but never really played anybody else's music. I think in his whole career, he may have recorded. I remember him recording "Embraceable You," but it's less than I don't know of any other. It's definitely less than a handful of standards that he's ever recorded. Yet he emerged with his own voice. It's like the rubric for a great jazz musician, to define a jazz musician, had been or has been one who plays the history of the music, the repertoire, and the vocabulary. Arnett, first of all, defied all that. He didn't do that. Although when he was a kid, he played like Louis Jordan, and he played all those. He played Charlie Parker as teenagers, along with my dad and everybody in Fort Worth, Texas. You have also recorded a lot of the great legacy, the great repertoire of jazz. I see in your 2015, I think, recording, you did Giant Steps. I said, whoa, I didn't realize that Stanley has dealt with this, which is kind of technically supposed to be one of the most difficult pieces in jazz history, right? But you have also played a lot of standards and have taken your rightful place in the lineage and the history of this great music. So on one hand, I want to congratulate you for being able to, be a part of the tradition, but yet way outside of the tradition in terms of your ideas and the way you've pioneered in this music with your conceptions and spreading out and doing the Jimi Hendrix concepts and just your vision for the music, man. I'm really just so proud to have been peeping in on you all these years and seeing your development.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point about Ornette Coleman, and I hadn't really thought about that. But yeah, he really didn't do a lot of standards, did he?
No.
And another thing too is just his, I don't know just his aura and his vibe and just the feeling of his music. I think that a lot of the music that goes in the sort of the avant-garde category has a kind of a serious quality to it and a certain intensity, whereas Ornette's music has a kind of a lightness of being about it. That's kind of refreshing. And the stuff that he did with your dad and stuff, who would do that without a pianist playing the chords? You know what I mean? It's just the concept of just the openness of that.
Yeah.
And just his sound, his tone. It's sort of like there's like a childlike quality to it. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I don't mean like childish. I mean like childlike. There's an innocence, and yet it's groundbreaking. I mean, I've been right there with him as he explained to me his harmonic concept, and it went over my head. It's like and I'm somebody who's been a music theory buff going way, way back. I know my theory, but the harmonic is not conventional music theory. It's a different way of thinking, and it's not something that you can wrap your normal rational brain around. Although a lot of the stuff that he would play was definitely stuff that, if you were to analyze it, it's very fascinating to analyze. But the analysis doesn't fully explain what it is that he did. And I think a lot of it really was just the idea of loosening the constraints and letting go of the kind of rigid, sort of getting out of the matrix, and just really, like, I remember he was talking about different musicians, and he said there's mainly two kinds of musicians. There's players and improvisers. And the way that he defined it, he didn't say which one he was, but I would have thought that he would have called himself more of a player, in the sense that the player is the one who's just really just sort of tapping into pure creativity, whereas the improviser is more like playing from the structure.
Yeah.
And there's not one that's better than the other. I think that we're at a time right now in which jazz has the aesthetic, the sort of the industry, what's promoted in jazz is very much about the structure. And I mean, I love that. I'm very much a musical structure geek. I've got stuff that I put online that I've got, for example, I have a website that's got almost 600,000 pages of guitar chords. So, you know, I'm into structure, okay?
Yeah.
But all the math and all the structure, it can't explain what the heart knows when there's a sound and you just know that that's the right sound and you go for that sound. There's no math that can explain that.
Yeah, Branford Marsalis, I was speaking with him and he said something very similar about all the theory, all the things that you mentioned. He said, but it's the feeling of the music, but he mentioned sound. I asked him actually, you know, what's important, is there's a difference, some dichotomy between sound and vocabulary.
I think that's the same dichotomy, basically.
Yeah. But he was like, he studied Sonny Rollins and many others to not try to create the vocabulary and what they were playing, but the sound is what he was trying to get to. And it's that sound that creates the emotion. It's that sound that touches the hearts of others. And you have that sound. I can hear your guitar and immediately at Stanley. You have an identity with the sound of the instrument. And so that's what we, you know, in my mind, that's what we all should be searching for. You've been able to find that, and it's no shame if it takes you a lifetime to find it. But you have been able to find that I think, relatively at a very young age, because you've been Stanley Jordan a long time, you know, in terms of your identity. So that was, my dad was really big on that, and he and Arnett studied together. So that was the whole thing. You know, musicians, the first thing they say to you, "Oh man, you sound good." That's you sound good. You know, you sound.
I'm telling you that if it sounds good, it is good.
Yeah. That's the thing, the sound of it all. And I know we're out of time, and I can talk with you forever. I know that you, I'll be interested in hearing some of your thoughts about your music therapy. I know you have experienced the power of music from a therapeutic standpoint, and I know you've studied and you're serious about that. I would really be interested in my audience hearing just a snippet about that. We're out of time, but how is that going? What is maybe one of the most profound things that you've learned about music and music therapy, you know, in the last several years?
Every aspect of health and healing can be helped with music, one way or another. Music can help other healing modalities. Music can also be a primary healing modality. And the reason why music has such power is because it touches us on every level. It touches us mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. And so it's not only the comprehensiveness of all those categories, but also the integration of all of that leads to the healing. So just to give you a few quick examples, there's the physical side of it. Like if you're recovering from an injury in your arms and you're getting back range of motion, you know, playing drums, you know, is a great way to engage those arms and get that energy going. And you have the motivation to do it because you're enjoying what you're doing. Singing or playing a wind instrument can help you with respiratory issues, could be asthma. And often asthma has an emotional component. If you go back to the source of where it came from, maybe someone as a child, there was a lot of fighting in the family, conflict. They hid in their bed and stopped breathing. And maybe that's where the issue started. So there's an emotional kind of arrested development there. Music gets those emotions out. Music also helps you with emotions that are ambivalent, like, I love this person, but I'm also angry at this person. Songs with lyrics can express all of that, or just sound can express that. Take a song that and change the song, change the lyrics. Take a song that expresses the problem that you're in now, change the lyrics to where you want your life to be. Segue it into that. So every time you hear that song, you're going to remember that segue. Spiritual. Addictions are a spiritual issue. Music fills that hole so that you don't have that sense of emptiness. That's just a few things. It goes on and on.
Wow,
it's a wonderful way. And I believe that it's going to be an important way that we heal ourselves in the 21st century.
Wow. On that note, I'm going to just bid you good night. I really appreciate you coming on, Ms. Stanley. I would love to reference what you're saying with samples of your music, but we might be able to do that and insert some of the things. I have a whole catalog of your music here, and it does all the things that you just said. So unfortunately, the audience may not hear that right this minute, but I hope that they're encouraged to go Google Stanley Jordan, listen to his music. My family is still back in New York. I'm looking for that April date. My daughter Jessica is over in Jersey and got people there. That'd be a good outing to go come into New York and check you out in April and say hello to you and everything.
Well, I hope you can. If you do, let me know. You can sit in. It would be great.
No
pressure, just if you want.
Yeah. A quick story about that. I was going to see Branford at the Village Vanguard back. He was doing a Love Supreme, at the Village Vanguard. He was doing those days. He was traveling doing Love Supreme. And I knew that he was going to ask me to sit in, right? And he's doing a Love Supreme. I mean, that John Coltrane, that's a big undertaking. And I knew.
So he did the whole album?
Yes. And I parked about 4 or 5 blocks down the street on 6th Avenue from Village Vanguard. And I knew Branford would ask me to sit in if I came in with my trumpet. In New York, you don't leave your instruments around in the car. Your car may be stolen, right? I left my instrument in the trunk on purpose because I didn't want to sit in with a Love Supremes. I love my instrument. I walked in and the first thing Branford asked me, he said, "Where's your horn?" I said, "It's in the car." And he looked at me and we knew. Okay, you didn't want to play because that makes no sense to leave the instrument. But
left your instrument in the car in New York.
You're right.
All right.
No, you don't do that.
You really don't want to play.
You're right. You don't want to play. And he looked at me really disgusted. But if I do come to your show, I'm gonna bring my trumpet just in case there's a little space there to do something with you. Okay. So thanks for coming on. It's been a treat and it's good to see you. You look wonderful, man. Good to see you.
Thanks.
And so that's going to be a wrap here on Black Music Footprints with the great Stanley Jordan. My name is Mondre Moffitt. We bid you good night.